Before we get started, this video was a long-awaited request by many of the Subscribe-Star bros. This movie is the first step to covering the whole trilogy, since that's practically a required ritual if you talk about media online, and this is a great one for the Halloween season. Let's make sure not to exacerbate things, though.
I'm not going to say if you love her, let her go, and I'm not going to bombard you with cliches, but what I will say is this. It's not the end of the world.
Those are people who died. 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 Oh, all my friends that just died. 1, 2, 3, 4. Those are people who died. 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 Oh, all my friends that just died.
Shaun the Dead. So this movie barely needs an introduction. It's the 2004 horror comedy created by Edgar Wright and Simon Pegg, now considered one of the greatest zombie films ever made. Shaun the Dead can't even be called a cult classic. It was massively successful and kicked off what is known as the Cornetto Trilogy, a series of satire films that poked fun at different genres, all while still serving as a great example of their subject matter. Hot Fuzz was about action films like Point Break and Bad Boys, Outworld's End was science fiction, things like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and to a smaller degree Shadow over Innsmouth, and Shaun the Dead was all about zombies, paying tribute to the classic Romero era with endless winks and nods to both famous and more obscure zombie media. To get right out of the way, I love Shaun the Dead. It's honestly something you could call a perfect movie. It has its concepts, and it runs with it as far as it wants to, with insane levels of refinement and detail. It doesn't get distracted or bogged down, and every scene has something fun to watch in it. There's the obvious stuff to talk about, like how every background character you see in the beginning comes back as a zombie, or how every piece of dialogue either foreshadows later events or is reincorporated in some way. This is all stuff that is immediately pointed out when anyone talks about Shaun the Dead, because it is impressive the level of thought that was put into something that, honestly, just started off as a goofy idea. You see, Shaun the Dead was inspired by an episode of the sitcom known as Spaced, a show Edgar Wright and Simon Pegg worked on together during the late 90s to early 2000s. The humor in Spaced could get very abstract and surrealist, and one episode in particular became the DNA that would eventually evolve into Shaun the Dead. Season 1, Episode 3, the episode Art, revolves around Simon Pegg's character Tim. He decides to go on a booze and drug binge, taking some speed he got from a dealer he bumped into on the street, and during his adventures, he decides to play through Resident Evil 2 for 24 hours straight. With this mixture of drugs, lack of sleep, and peak video game all sitting in his brain, he starts to hallucinate the world around him as being flooded with zombies, leading to some awkward situations.
I'll see you later.
It's a fun episode. Spaced itself is a great show, and this is commonly cited as what would later become the film. Even Edgar Wright and Simon Pegg themselves flat out said they were sitting on the idea ever since they made the episode. Now, the show ended in 2001, only getting 2 seasons. So Shaun of the Dead started off, funnily enough, as more just an excuse to get the gang back together. There's a ton of references to Spaced in the movie, really the Cornetto Trilogy as a whole, and some of them can be pretty subtle.
Let's get him as your boyfriend.
He's not my boyfriend. Hi, babe. He's not my boyfriend.
Might be a bit warm, the cooler's off. Thanks, babe.
Now, obviously, this is a different beast from the show. Spaced was a surrealist comedy about a group of losers, while Shaun of the Dead is, ironically, a more grounded and character-focused dark comedy. Shaun of the Dead nails a lot of its elements. It works as both a goofy comedy and a genuinely compelling zombie story. In fact, this is one of the movies that ended up kicking off the 2000s era zombie boom. It, the Dawn of the Dead remake, 20 Days Later, and Land of the Dead. This movie has been referenced countless times. The amount of zombie games that have had a "You've Got Red on You" achievement cannot even begin to be counted. Hell, you can unlock Shaun's outfit in Dead Rising 2, and that's just a single example. It's a movie that only seems to age better as time goes on, which is the best possible fate a movie could have. It's been 20 years since it's released, and the fanbase for it has only gotten more loyal. Yes, Shaun of the Dead is 20 years old now. Feel the existential dread. You know it's there. Still, it's a movie that manages to balance a lot of plates. Most movies, and especially zombie movies, that try to do horror and comedy can struggle keeping the two tones equal. You have ones that do it right. Brain Dead does it pretty well. Also, the first Zombieland hits the notes as it should, at least how I see it. But there's others that just can't get it quite right. Scouts vs. Zombies isn't bad. but just not able to reach the same highs. You had the deluge of shitty zombie comedies that came out after Shaun of the Dead exploded, trying to ride its coattails, like Zombie Strippers or Zombievers. These fundamentally misunderstand what made something like Shaun of the Dead work, which is that the concept itself is taken pretty seriously. The zombies themselves in the movie aren't anything gimmicky or kooky. They're classic Romero zombies, slow and shambling corpses that walk around trying to eat people. It's the characters that are goofy. Shaun of the Dead is essentially taking a British sitcom and plopping it in the middle of a zombie outbreak. You have a cast of quirky and weird characters all trying not to get eaten alive. Each one is crazy in their own way, yet all work is very believable and human. The movie is even capable of having some genuinely emotional moments. The greatest strength the movie has is its characters. This is one of the rare cases of a zombie story where the cast aren't complete idiots. I mean, they are complete idiots, but you fully buy into why they make the choices they do. The characters all start off as your basic sitcom cast. You have Shaun, a late 20-something-year-old slacker about to hit 30 who has zero direction in life. He's just working to pay the bills as he spends each day getting blackout drunk with his best friend Ed, a complete loser who sleeps on the couch. They live in the middle of London, Shaun working at a small electronics shop while Ed sells weed, and the story starts as Shaun starting to nosedive his relationship with his girlfriend Liz. While Shaun has less than zero ambition and is just sort of surviving day to day, Liz wants more out of the world. She wants to live life to the fullest and try new things. Shaun also deals with the personality conflicts that arise between Liz and her friends and Ed, whose loud and boisterous personality makes him hard to deal with for some people. Multiple characters point out how Ed is essentially holding Shaun back, the two deciding to remain loser friends forever instead of letting things go and growing up. There's also personal issues between Shaun and his parents, specifically his stepfather Philip. Their relationship has been tenuous since he showed up in Shaun's life when he was a teenager, an old-style strict father figure with this guy who doesn't really know what he wants to do in his life. Shaun, to get out of the way, is a great protagonist. He's painfully relatable for anybody that was trying to figure out what they wanted to do when they hit their 20s. You know you want to do more, but it's so easy to get wrapped up in your routine that you don't ever really have time to think about it. You just sort of coast in life, always thinking, I got time. And Simon Pegg easily nails the role. He shows a variety of emotions, and each one feels very natural and like a real human reaction. He's goofy, terrified, broken. You can easily see Shaun as one of your real-life friends. There's even moments where he becomes a legitimate badass. Of course, you can't talk about Shaun without mentioning Ed, his partner in crime. Ed is essentially the second half of Shaun. Nick Frost and Simon Pegg's chemistry on screen is so well known that the entire Cornetto Trilogy was sold on the two, and other movies even advertised them as big selling points. Paul sucks ass, by the way. Still, their friendship feels authentic. It helps that they're actual friends in real life, so they just naturally know how to banter off each other, and the entire movie revolves around their bond. While Shaun and Liz's relationship is key to the story, you can argue his friendship with Ed takes more of a focus. They're in pretty much 99% of scenes together, and a major source of conflict is whether or not Shaun should break up his friendship with Ed. On one hand, you do see what everyone's talking about. Ed enables the worst parts of Shaun's personality, and all around seems like a short-sighted idiot. He constantly barges into Shaun's life, messing up his relationships with other people, and what makes this tragic is that Ed is actually a pretty good friend for Shaun. He does care about the guy and wants to help, it's just he would rather sit on the couch and play video games forever, and wants Shaun right there next to him the whole way through. So it's a sad case where Shaun doesn't want to let this guy go, and they really shouldn't have to, but life isn't fair. There's a painfully British way the comedy's handled in the movie. You have these situations and conflicts that pop up, and they're resolved in decidedly gruesome or upsetting ways, something that's pretty common for English black comedies. Something that, funny enough, Zombieland kind of mirrors. While Shaun of the Dead is about the inevitability of life and how you can't escape from change, Zombieland is more about standing up for yourself and rising to the occasion. You have the English perspective and the American perspective. It's why I like Zombieland to this day, even if others say it's Reddit the zombie movie. I don't think it's that bad. It still has elements of satire that let it stand above the rest, and saying how Americans are hyper-violent enough as to survive a zombie outbreak.
Anybody hungry? Tallahassee's nice this time of year!
Which is leagues above something like The Dead Don't Die, which feels like a confused mess of ideas and half-thought-out political ravings that don't really gel together. Shaun of the Dead is full of ironic fates the whole way through, especially if you buy into some of the fan theories around the film, which we'll talk about towards the end. Now, the whole movie isn't just dumping on Shaun and reinforcing how he's a total screw-up. The story makes it clear he's not alone in the downward spiral. In fact, it's funny when you sit back and realize how many characters are sort of projecting onto Shaun. The obvious ones to talk about for this are Liz and her friends, Diane and David. Now, Diane's a nice enough lady, a struggling actress that's just sort of happy to be involved and actually kind of likes Shaun and Ed. Meanwhile, David is a complete prick. He was rejected by Liz first and hasn't really ever gotten over it, so he spends any time he has criticizing Shaun and trying to one-up him. Liz herself, we don't know too much about, but it's safe to assume she's probably in a similar position to Shaun. Her life is equally monotonous and she's stuck in a spiral. At first, she blames it on Shaun since he's downright refusing to change his ways and grow up, but it becomes clear later on she's also struggling to really figure out life. A large part of the story is that people want to break out of the day-to-day routine, but it's hard as hell to really figure out what that means. Some embrace it and just sort of become content in life, others actively do what they can to break out of the 9 to 5. The obvious thing to mention is the social commentary angle. Now, zombie stories being metaphor for people and their role in society isn't a new thing by any definition. The Romero of the Dead trilogy is well known for commenting on human nature, with Night of the Living Dead talking about how humanity's propensity to fight amongst each other will lead to our own destruction, and each subsequent movie expands on this. Dawn adds in a sort of satire angle with comparisons to consumerism and shopping mall culture, and Day of the Dead posing the idea that the zombies simply did what the Cold War was going to do anyway, which is wipe out mankind. Now, some of these ideas are more intentional than others. George Romero actually had no idea he was even commenting on consumerism with Dawn of the Dead until someone point blank pointed it out to him. And Night of the Living Dead had no intention on commenting on racial issues during the 1960s, pretty much whatsoever. Dwayne Jones was simply cast in the role because Romero liked him, unintentionally creating the first leading black actor in a major horror film. And also didn't help that Martin Luther King was assassinated by the FBI not long before the film's release. So the idea of using zombies as a metaphor is such a well-worn trope that it's sort of going full circle, where people have gotten sick of the man is the real monster trope and would prefer just a straight-up fun zombie story again. Still, Shaun of the Dead uses the zombies to comment on our nature to get sucked into routine, since that's basically what a zombie already is, a mindless drone walking around looking for its next meal. A commonly pointed out detail for the film is how a lot of the background characters already look and act like zombies before the zombies even show up. Or how Shaun is so stuck in his routine it takes a literal zombie barging into his house for him to start putting the piece together, with the famous long shots of Shaun walking to the store and back, one before the zombies and one after, with Shaun acting no different in both versions. And you have the scene where Shaun and his friends awkwardly mimic how a zombie walks to get past a horde, which works for no real reason, but it makes sense when you realize that they just went back to doing what they've always done. Try to look like other people and that they belong there. Keep your head down and don't stand out. Now, there's more I want to talk about this movie, but I can't do it without spoiling, so here's a warning for like the 5 people on Earth that haven't seen Shaun of the Dead. You absolutely should, it's a great movie. Still, here's the cutoff point in case you need it.
Sorry, we're closed!
So Shaun of the Dead is a very efficient story. The whole movie is just around 90 minutes or so. A very clear 3-act structure you can break down in chunks. First 30 minutes, set up the characters and their circumstances. Hour mark, establish the presence of zombies and the drive to get the story moving. Last 30 minutes, character arcs come to a head and conflicts are all resolved. It keeps things as simple as it can, since the point of the story are these characters more than the larger world around them. In fact, a theme of the story is they're woefully blind to everything going on. Where the zombies come from? Who knows and who cares? In fact, there's a ton of jokes about the cause of the infection that serve as references to other films. You have the space probe explanation from Night of the Living Dead, the rage-infected monkeys from 28 Days Later, infected grain food is brought up, a nod to The Living Dead at Manchester Morgue, a more underground zombie film that was a cult hit in the UK. They even name-drop Judgment Day as a possible reason, a reference to the biblical implications behind the outbreak from Dawn of the Dead and Day of the Dead. The point is you don't need to know why the zombies are running around. They just are, and the characters have to deal with it. The whole point of the story is that these are normal people thrust into a completely bananas situation. They're not going to discover the truth behind the outbreak, they're just trying to keep their insides from being chewed on. They all react realistically. Nobody in the cast is a complete buffoon or a superhero. Even a guy like David, meant to be the unlikable asshole, isn't completely wrong in his assessment of the situation. There's effort to make sure every character has their moment to be capable and a total liability. When the zombies are introduced, Shaun and Ed are clueless on what to do. They get rid of the zombies that are trying to barge into the house, but after that, all they can really do is watch TV and hope the news will give them the answers. Hell, Ed begs Shaun to call the police, an ambulance, or even a fire truck. Anything with flashing lights. All they know how to do is sit and wait for the authorities to show up and take care of things. Which obviously doesn't work because these things are everywhere eating people, so they have to sit down and figure out their next move. And the plan they come up with is exactly something a dude who has no idea what to do in a survival situation would think of first. Just make sure your loved ones are okay and hole up in a place that sounds safe and familiar. On paper, it makes sense. You don't want to think about your friends or family stuck in the middle of a zombie outbreak where you can't get to them. The problem is they didn't really think things through. You see, Ed isn't focused on the mission. He's continuing his short-sighted and impulsive tendencies. One of his categories for a place they need to hole up in is somewhere he's allowed to smoke. And he also wrecks the car on purpose for no other reason than so he could drive Philip's car, since it was a sleek Jaguar. Ed wrecked something they could have possibly used as a backup car or something for an emergency, so they could switch to a smaller car that looked prettier. And this is a move that actually gets Philip killed, as he's bitten by a zombie as they go into the Jaguar. You also see another mistake when they go to save Liz and her friends. When Shaun gets to their apartment, they're actually hidden from the zombies and comfortable. They could have easily sat there and just waited the whole thing out. It was Shaun that dragged them outside and into danger for his plan.
I've come to take you somewhere safe. We're perfectly
perfectly safe before you arrived.
And the whole idea of going to the Winchester was a bad move since it was in the middle of the city, meaning they'd be running straight into a massive horde of zombies. A smart thing would have been trying to escape the city, which is what's actually implied with Ivon and her group. Ivon in general is interesting, but we'll talk about her later. Still, every step of the way, everything is going wrong, and screaming in their ear not to go to the Winchester. But they press on nonetheless because, well, they don't know what else to do. All they know is they need to do something. They're seeking out familiarity in times of crisis, even if it's a bad idea, because the Winchester itself isn't exactly the fortress they thought it was going to be. Sure, it's a big solid building with heavy doors, but it also has big glass windows you can easily break and slip inside. Hell, that's exactly what happens, both when David throws a trash can through the window, when it looks like a horde is about to attack, and later on when the zombies break into the pub. In fact, they break in multiple ways, from the back door to the side door, the windows. There were zombies already in the pub. This place was vulnerable as all hell. They only ran to it because it's the only place they really knew. And as much as Liz, David, or whoever pointed out how bad of an idea the pub was, they all still went along because it's a place of comfort, even if they hate it. But who hasn't thought they'd discovered the secret to beating a zombie apocalypse by saying they go to a shopping mall or a gun store or something like that? The Winchester plan falling apart sort of makes fun of that idea by just showing how getting to the place would be deadly, and when you actually do get there, you still have to think about how vulnerable the place is and how easily zombies could force their way inside. Same thing with the joke about the gun. When they try to shoot the rifle, they have no idea what they're doing. Now, they are English, so that's a massive debuff right there, and it doesn't help that none of them have touched a gun before in their lives. Hell, the only one who can actually shoot it is Ed, but they never let him handle it. Shaun is the one who takes up the job of shooting, and it's made abundantly clear he doesn't know what the fuck to do. He's just pointing and firing. Once again, a fun jab at the idea you could just pick up a gun and instantly start taking headshots when zombies start walking around. They did a better job just bashing him in the head with something blunt, since that's mindless. Just swing until it stops moving. Still, the whole point is that the movie is built to sort of make fun of the weekend warrior types that watch a bunch of zombie movies and think they can go through it just fine because they're smarter than the characters they see in media. It shows how easy it is for normal people to come up with flawed plans, persist on those plans even after everything goes wrong, and eventually put themselves in a corner. And the best part is that on your first viewing, you won't even realize how stupid the Winchester idea really was. It sounds like it makes perfect sense. Yeah, an old school tavern would be secure enough to ride things out. It has food, big doors you can lock, even a cellar or a second floor you can run to if things go south. It's only once you're standing in the building itself do you get that moment to sit back and go, oh, I'm a fucking idiot. Shaun of the Dead also has an interesting way it handles its characters, something that pushes the theme of change and growing up. You see, most everybody in the story dies. Pete, Philip, David, Barbara, Ed, all get killed off in increasingly upsetting or grisly ways. Pete's death isn't really that big of a deal. You find out he was bitten and he turns as he was showering for work. It's played as a dark joke, which fits since while him and Shaun were friends, they weren't really super close. And they even made sure Pete was kind of a dick that would tear into Shaun and Ed when he got frustrated. Philip's death is more emotional, since the point was to show how Shaun sort of took him for granted, now acknowledging him as his father even though Philip really did care about him. They just struggled to connect as Shaun was already a teenager when Philip married his mother. Barbara's death is leagues more upsetting, as Shaun is forced to watch her die in turn as she was hiding a bite from the group, which she only did because she didn't want to worry Shaun. While his relationship with Philip was rocky, Shaun truly loved his mother, and he becomes an emotional wreck when the inevitable comes up. They have to put her down. It turns into a screaming match between Shaun, Ed, and David, with Shaun refusing to admit she was gone and about to become a zombie. And unfortunately, Liz has to talk him down, and he chooses to put his mother down when she does come back as a zombie. It's a horrifying scene, something that shifts the tone from dark comedy you saw before into a legitimate horror movie. The zombies all around have an interesting change in how they're treated. When the zombies first show up, they're kind of a joke. You get slapstick scenes of Shaun trying to fight them off, such as the famous record scene. The zombies also look goofy, shambling around and moaning like a stereotypical horde. And hell, you have that montage of Shaun going from Liz's apartment and back, where he's just beating the shit out of them. They even take it a step further and have some of them repeating behaviors they had in their living life, like the zombie kid hitting him in the head with a soccer ball or their store owner still looking for change. The zombies aren't treated as a serious threat for a while in the film. They do some things, they are dangerous, but their presence escalates throughout the runtime. It takes them getting to the Winchester for it to really hit these things are extremely dangerous, and they are surrounded by them. Even the look of the zombies sort of change. The first few you see are relatively clean, just pale with dead eyes. The only messed up looking ones are ones you see deep in the background, show up for half a second, or the armless guy that barges into the house. But the Winchester horde are significantly more gnarly. They're smeared in blood, and the lighting shifts to show off how dirty and feral they are. They go from just shambling people walking around to this fucked up group of monsters. The threat is no longer just something they can run past, they're stuck in the Winchester with this mob outside trying to bust in. This comes to a head after David is killed, After the death of Barbara, David freaks out and tries to make a run for it, unlocking the door and trying to talk Liz and Diane to abandon Shaun and Ed, which they refuse, since the horde is right outside and they are well aware they're in there, so the minute they try to run, they'll be torn to pieces. And Diane is forced to scream at him until David finally realizes how stupid he's been, and right as about to apologize, he's pulled through the window. His death is a clear tribute to the Colonel Rhodes death from Day of the Dead. Every zombie movie needs to have one of those at some point. In fact, his whole character is kind of meant to be similar to Rhodes. He's the antagonist stoking tensions and keeping the group from working together, so him receiving such a grisly death fits, being torn apart by the horde. But the irony is that he was about to apologize. He knew he was being an idiot and was going to try to make amends, which is when he was killed. A very British punchline to this situation. This grim irony that the complete asshole did want to change, and he died before he could. Still, the zombies flood into the bar, with Diane going into shock and chasing after what's left of David as the horde pushes in. Ed, Liz, and Shaun try to fight them off, but it's a losing battle. There's too many, and Shaun isn't able to wield the rifle properly to fend them off. Ed rushes to make Molotovs, and is jumped by a group of zombies breaking into the side door. There he gets distracted by the arrival of Pete, who actually followed them from the house all the way to the Winchester, and because he got distracted, he's bitten by both Pete and Old Lady Zombie. This is weirdly fitting for Ed, as him and Pete despised each other, so having Pete be the one to bite Ed is an ironic comeuppance, especially since he was bitten as he put Pete in a headlock, venting some of his frustrations out at the guy, instead of just pushing him away and focusing back on the task. And the Old Lady Zombie is a funny nod to how he made constant sex jokes about Shaun's mom, showing very clearly he was attracted to her and probably had an older woman kink considering some of the other signs, like inventing a backstory for one of the patrons at the bar that she was an ex-porn star. So having an old woman bite Ed is a funny punchline. He spent the whole movie lusting after an older woman, now one's biting into his neck. Still, what's left of the group rush behind the bar to escape the horde, Shaun setting the whole thing on fire to ward off the zombies, though forgetting he left the ammo up there, which cooks off and, ironically, kills more zombies than when they were shooting the actual gun. They find an opening to escape into the cellar, hoping to use the barrel hatch to get back outside, but it seems like they're trapped. It won't open. Shaun breaks down once again, realizing how he screwed everything up, and he couldn't save anybody, and Liz comforts him by saying at least he tried, though the two are definitely talking about suicide at this point, I would. And really, this is the theme of the movie. Shaun tried to change his ways and better himself, even if it was a complete disaster. He's lost everyone in his life, from his friends to his job, all the way to his parents. The only person he has left is Liz. Thankfully, she's willing to patch things up with Shaun, and the two reconcile their relationship as they discover the panel that activates the barrel hatch. Shaun tries to talk Ed into following him, but he knows he's screwed. He's bleeding out and bitten, so he takes the gun and promises to cover them with what little ammo they have left as Shaun and Liz escape, the two leaving him behind just as the zombies break into the cellar. Now, Ed's death is very fitting for his character. Remember, a large theme of the movie is change and breaking out of your routine. Ed, as a character, never wanted to change. He was happy being a slacker that didn't do anything all day. He wasn't a bad guy, but he also never wanted to improve. So him dying to give Shaun another shot at life, he knew he was holding Shaun back, but he didn't want to lose his friend. He knew he was a loser, but he was happy being a loser. And you'll notice a common theme behind everybody who dies in the film. They had no intention on changing. Barbara and Philip are old and set in their ways. Hell, it took Barbara literally being bitten for her to realize how bad the situation is. Same with Philip. Hell, with him being bitten, it wasn't even really enough. Pete dies both from bad luck and also because he wasn't paying attention to everything around him, being bitten while coming home from work. He's another person who didn't really have any intentions on changing. He was fully convinced he was fine and it was Ed who was the problem. Everything would be better if Ed was gone, which also fits why he's one of the zombies that bites him. He finally gets to get rid of that fat pain in the ass he was stuck living with, and Shaun's chance to stand up to him is him blowing his head off to save Ed from being devoured. Pete was fully consumed by the rat race, which is why he becomes yet another face in the horde. David dies because he can never really let go of his feelings for Liz, constantly picking fights with Shaun and trying to wrestle control of the group from him. You even see that he was basically Liz's Ed, an old friend with an abrasive personality that's more of a screw-up than they'd like to admit, since David makes multiple mistakes that put everyone at risk, such as throwing the can through the window, causing a massive vulnerability in the bar, and wildly flicking the lights on and off while trying to turn off the jukebox, which just grabbed the attention of the zombies and lured more towards the pub. He's also the one who escalates the Barbara situation into a full-on screaming match, callously saying he was going to shoot her while Shaun was still grieving, and throwing out tons more put-downs while the guy was already at his lowest point, even sarcastically calling Shaun Pickle, the affectionate nickname his mother referred to him as. David is a similar case to Pete, and that not only did he think he didn't need to change, he was the only grown-up in the room, saying Shaun is just a man-child that needs to go away so he could have another shot at Liz, selfishly disregarding his actual girlfriend Diane, she herself long since accepting that she's simply the rebound girl that scooped him up after Liz broke his heart. Now, David doesn't turn to a zombie, mainly because there wasn't much left to turn. which I think is a funny detail. The idea he's so annoying not even the zombies want him running around is one of them. Granted, the idea is more so to have that big gross out death, but my interpretation sounds more fun. By the way, his actor, Dylan Moran, is actually really good in the role. He plays such a believably pretentious prick that I wouldn't be surprised if he based the character off somebody he knew in real life. He has all the little subtleties of this pathetic loser that's doing everything he can to project his problems onto other people. Wouldn't be shocked if that's the case for the whole film, since everyone feels like living, breathing people. Up until they're zombies. Kate Ashfield, who plays Liz, manages to be a genuinely compelling love interest for Shaun. She never crosses the line into being an unlikable bitch that you wonder why Shaun even still wants her. No, her and Shaun do have a connection, and you do see it was him that screwed things up. She wants him to change so they can be together, and even has her own little hypocrisies that the movie comments on. Barbara, played by Penelope Wilton, also embodies a very warm and caring mother figure that you are genuinely sad to see die. She cares about her son and has to learn to listen to him when he starts to rise up as the leader of the group. The entire reason she hides her bite is because she was worried about upsetting Shaun, even though she does realize it means she's gonna die. Philip doesn't have too much time to really flesh out his character, but his actor Bill Nighy also does great in the role. You can tell the guy wants to break through to Shaun, he just doesn't know how. Yeah, he was a hard ass, but that's just how his generation was raised, and he was just trying to emulate how he was taught. His final monologue before he dies is him lamenting he couldn't build a relationship with his stepson, but he knows Shaun has it in him to be a real man, finally having this one last moment before he goes. The sad irony, once again, being that Shaun sadly couldn't protect his mother. Pete, played by Peter Serafinowicz, plays a pretty good straight man to the goofy duo that is Shaun and Ed. Once again, he doesn't have a lot of screen time before he becomes a zombie, but the few scenes you see him in also show little subtleties that let you know he's a deeper guy than what you just see on the movie. He was a slacker like Shaun and Ed when he was younger, but he eventually grew out of it. He already had his character arc and is growing increasingly annoyed with how Shaun and Ed refuse to keep up. Hell, you see little moments that do show Pete genuinely likes Shaun, like how he assumes Ed was the one who left the door open when you later see it was actually Shaun who had a bad habit of doing that, and even backs down later that night when he was yelling at the two for playing loud music at 4 a.m. after Shaun tells him he broke up with Liz.
We split up with Liz tonight. Just keep it down, yeah.
It was Ed calling him a prick that escalated things into a full-on fight. Now, a character I've neglected to mention so far is Ivon. She's an interesting one, even if she only shows up a handful of times. You see, she's basically a female version of Shaun. She also has her own life and friend circle, only really knowing Shaun and Liz from college. Ivon is another spaced reference, as she's played by Jessica Stevenson, who was a major actor on the show, outright playing the second protagonist, and the joke with her is that she's a put-together person with a good life, while in Spaced, she was kind of a complete fuck-up, a failed writer coasting day-to-day looking for a big break. So having her play the total opposite in Shaun of the Dead is a fun nod that fans of Spaced will probably pick up on. They even directly reference that she's basically the female Shaun when you run into Yvonne's group halfway through the film. She herself is leading a group of survivors made up of her friends and family that directly mirror Shaun's group. They outright call attention to it for a scene. She also shows up at the very end of the film riding with a unit of the British military who come in to clear out the zombies. This has multiple layers to the punchline. For one, you have the obvious callback to her "at least somebody made it" line, this time in a sadder context since it's in reference to the fact Shaun and Liz are the only ones left alive. Second, it's implied Yvonne's group made out fine by going the opposite direction of Shaun and trying to escape the city. Yvonne only came back because Shaun said that his group was going to the Winchester. The last joke is the presence of the military themselves. As it turns out, the world wasn't falling to the growing number of the living dead. The military was slowly going through and clearing out chunks of the city. Reminder, the zombies are slow and shambling, and you have to be bitten in order to turn. They never actually make it clear if just dying causes resurrection, but maybe you can assume it. So as long as you get a decent number of guys together with guns who can aim worth a damn, you're fine. Also, a nod to the ending of Night of the Living Dead, with the militia coming around and clearing out zombies. So as yet another point of irony for the story, if they all just stayed home, the military could have possibly evacuated them faster. If they just listened to the man on the TV when he was saying to stay home and not to try to reach loved ones, a lot more people could have made it out alive. Now, this is where you can debate some points of the story. Supposedly Philip was bitten before Shaun and Ed got to the house, so they would have needed to get over there and handle that. But that leads into some interesting fan theories I talked about. You see, there is a legitimate argument that Philip was perfectly fine. For one, you don't know if he was actually bitten by zombies. Barbara just described it as some men tried to get into the house and they were a tad bitey. Now, she does flat out say that he was bitten, but a tad bitey is actually a slang term for generally being aggressive. It could mean being argumentative or trying to pick a fight, and there's some logistical things to think about if it was zombies. The obvious question being, where are they? There's zero chance Philip would have paid attention to the news. He wrote the whole thing off as just a bunch of drug addicts rioting, and if he did know, there's no chance he would have been able or willing to use the headshot rule. So those zombies could have still been trying to break into the house, but we don't see anyone banging on the doors or windows. Barbara and Philip are going about their day as usual. It's an actual possibility Philip wasn't bitten by a zombie. Instead, he could have been attacked by a panicked survivor looking for shelter, and he just ran them off. And he was feeling sick because a random dude just bit into his arm. Because he doesn't really show any significant change in his behavior after the attack, he still looks and acts the same. Yeah, they said he feels sickly, but that's also because he was just attacked by somebody and his wound is probably not feeling the best. Hell, to drive the point home further, the movie has to physically show him being bitten a second time, so you know for sure he was infected. Something they didn't do with Pete because he just flat out said he was bitten, which raises another interesting question for the story. You see, the time frame between bites and when you turn is a tad wonky. Some characters are bitten and turn in a relatively short amount of time, others it takes longer. It took Barbara about 2 hours in the movie to turn, roughly, from the incident with the man in the pajamas to the zombies trying to break into the Winchester. We can assume it took around 2 hours in movie time because Shaun was gone for a chunk of time leading the horde away from the bar, and then a chunk of time of them sitting in the dark eating peanuts. Pete took even longer, taking an entire night to turn, since he became a zombie while he was in the shower getting ready for work. Now, you could argue the spot where you're bitten could affect things. Being bitten on the neck would obviously kill you faster than a bite on the limb, since one spot relies on you bleeding to death, while the other relies on the infection to kill you. But still a large enough chunk of time that you can start asking some questions. Now, zombie stories messing with the time of infection is not anything new. Very few of them have a solid time frame because they want to use the mechanic for drama, but Shaun the Dead paying so much attention to detail makes this a weird contradiction. Everything has so much detail except for exactly how you turn into a zombie. This has led to some fan theories on how the bites work. You have ones like each generation of zombie spreads the infection faster than the last one, so the first wave biting people will be a lot slower than the newer ones, which explains how the infection could build so steadily while nobody was paying attention, since somebody could be bitten and go about their day like usual without realizing what's happening. There's also the most famous one, which is the cold water theory. The cold water theory stems from a line Philip has after Shaun and Ed go to check on them. Philip says he's fine despite Barbara's nagging, since he ran the bite under a cold tap of water, which was a famous way for older generations to clean wounds without having to see a doctor. Well, the theory states that this trick actually works, that you can delay or stop infection by lowering your body temperature, allowing your immune system to fight it off, which is why it took so long for Pete to turn. He got his bite treated by a doctor who cleaned it, then got into a hot shower that raised his body temperature, which bolstered the infection and killed him. So the reason the infection became so manageable after the military came in is because they figured out how to delay or stop people from turning. You hear in a throwaway line during the epilogue that they did discover the cause of infection, though it's cut off before they reveal it. So it's possible they found out what the infection was and a way to counter it. Now, the cold water theory is exactly that, a theory. Just something fans came up with to explain some things the film doesn't really explain. I just like the theory since it plays into the irony of the movie, that if Shaun simply stayed home or went to visit his parents, then none of the death or carnage would have happened. All he had to do was sit and wait. But obviously, with the information he had, that's a lot easier said than done. Still, that's Shaun the Dead. An absolutely fantastic movie I cannot recommend highly enough. And if you're hankering for more, don't worry, there's a tad bit more movie you can pick up on if you're desperate. For one, there was an official comic strip that explained the backstory of the zombie known as Mary, the one who shows up in Shaun's backyard. Also the big zombie that was following her. It's a quick little thing just to sort of flesh out her character and give a tad bit more context to what's happening, like it explains how she got in the backyard in the first place. It's nothing major, but it's a fun treat for fans. You also have the behind the scenes features that explain a bit more about how exactly the characters ended up after the movie. Like it explains Ed avoided being eaten by shooting 3 zombies before bleeding out, shooting 1 in the jaw and killing 2 with a perfect headshot, making it clear he really should have been the one handling the gun. For some reason, he just knew what he was doing with it. You also find out Diane is still alive. Yeah, despite running into a horde of zombies and never to be seen again, and we assume that she's been ripped to shreds, you find out she's alive. Turns out she hid in a tree after escaping the horde and survived up there for a week before being rescued. She lives with her relatives in Birmingham, even sending Shaun and Liz Christmas cards. This is a fun little punchline considering how obviously it looked like she died, and it's also a weirdly fair way to treat her character. She's not a bad person in the slightest and even seems to like Shaun and Ed. She's also the most outgoing of the group, always trying new things and being driven to see through her dream of being an actress. So it makes sense she wouldn't die as she is somebody willing to live life to the fullest and isn't afraid of change. She's not just stagnating in her routine. But of course, I can't neglect to mention what happens to Ed after the epilogue. Yeah, he lives in the shed now, just like Pete said he would, and he gets to play video games with Shaun. Now, this is an interesting plot point for multiple reasons. I mean, it was obvious Ed was gonna die. He got bit twice and was left to a pissed off horde breaking into the cellar, but the fact he's pretty much intact is interesting. As stated, the behind the scenes lore says he did kill 3 zombies, which gave him enough time to bleed out. So by the time Shaun and Liz were leaving the cellar, he was already on his way to dying. So he was telling Shaun to leave him behind because he could physically feel he was about to go and knew it would be pointless. But the interesting detail is what happens when Shaun grabs the controller. For half a second, it looks like Ed's trying to bite him. Now, Shaun's able to scold him and get him them to stop, but it does raise a good point. Throughout the film, you see signs that the zombies have some form of humanity buried in them. Zombies will go to places that are familiar to them, or react to things that they remember subconsciously, like Pete getting pissed off after Shaun mentions they're taking his car, Philip turning off the radio because it annoyed him, and Barbara seems sad as she looks at Shaun, only going feral after David screams at her. You see signs that the zombies do seem to remember people and things they did before, which was something the Of the Dead movies teased and expanded on as they went on, starting off subtle in Night and Dawn, with zombies using weapons and their desire to enter the mall because something is telling them to go back to it. Then there is straight up a Frankenstein-style subplot in Day of the Dead, with the crazy scientist training Bub the zombie, who has a very clear ability to remember habits and behaviors he performed as a human and becomes able to think and feel emotions again. Then they pushed this into overdrive in Land of the Dead, with them building an entire army capable of using firearms and strategies, with the zombies led by the mysterious Big Daddy wanting vengeance on the humans for their raids on towns owned by the dead. Shaun of the Dead never goes this far, and they keep it solely in the Dawn of the Dead territory, with maybe some slight elements of Day. There's still people stuck in the zombies, and you have these small moments that tease a pretty disturbing body horror concept, that you are still you and you're stuck in this shambling body. And this does raise kind of a funny question with Ed in particular, since there is still Ed buried deep down inside of him. Was he actually trying to bite Shaun? He was pretty quick to give up after he yelled at him and went back to playing video games, so it's possible he was actually just fucking with Shaun and never intended on biting him. It fit his character, since he liked to pull pranks on people. Of course, it's not that funny to try and do that. One bite and Shaun is fucked, but regardless, you get a happy ending, kinda. And that's Shaun of the Dead, an absolutely fantastic film that is basically required viewing, both if you're a horror film fan and if you just like movies in general. The humor's fantastic, with all sorts of winks and nods buried in deeper corners. The characters are all relatable and easy to like, with some great performances by the actors. The editing is energetic and always fun to watch, something the Cornetto Trilogy would just sort of keep as their main style for the films. The violence is grisly. It's not all over the place, but there's definitely more than enough gore to satisfy a splatter junkie. Hell, watching through it again recently, I'm still shocked how well some of the violence holds up. It's not afraid to pull the rug out from under you and make things a lot less fun. It is a legitimate horror film, just one that's disguised as a British romantic comedy. Hell, the tagline for the film is a romantic comedy with zombies. I can't recommend this highly enough, really the whole Cornetto trilogy, but Shaun of the Dead is something I'll always say is perfect for Halloween season. You just can't go wrong with it. And if you're still on the fence, just know this ended up becoming George Romero's favorite film. Well, one of them at least. Yeah, the guy who created the modern concept of a zombie ended up loving this movie, to the point he was inspired by it for the later parts of his career. Simon Pegg and Edgar Wright have cameos in Land of the Dead as zombies, and the increased focus on dark humor in Land of the Dead onwards was a direct result of Shaun of the Dead. When the guy who built the genre is inspired by your work, you basically have infinite bragging rights. Now, there's so much more to talk about this movie, it's crazy. I haven't even gotten into the music, where they use tracks from Goblin, the same band that made the soundtrack for Dawn of the Dead, or the nearly relentless amounts of reincorporation for pretty much every element, from background details to dialogue. There's not a lot this movie just sort of forgets. All the background references to famous horror films and directors. This is jam-packed with love for horror, and you can outright play a drinking game with the amount of references they shove into this. But that stuff you should all sit down and see for yourselves. Hell, they were doing anniversary showings of this film not too long ago. The enthusiasm for this movie has refused to die, which is a good thing. This is a good movie. It should still be talked about. And you know what else should still be talked about? Gamer subs, use code TALL at checkout for 10% off your order. It's a good code. They have new flavors and cup designs. Use the code. New shirts and flavors. Code. Use code. Use code now. Also, they're doing a special deal. For this weekend, you can get free samples, 100% free, completely free. Samples. Free samples. They're pretty good. And that's because this weekend, the code changes. Now it's not just 10% off. You get free shipping across all orders. And you can get your free samples just fine, for no money. It's pretty great. Use the code. You use the code or you have to shoot your mom in the face. Oh, I shouldn't have made that joke, now I'm sad. Still, hope you guys sit down and use the time you've got this Halloween season to enjoy one hell of a zombie flick. Even if you're exhausted of zombies, since media is chock full of them, this is a fantastic one that stands above the rest. It's truly something special. That's about all I can say about Shaun of the Dead. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. See you guys. loser. Do you want a shirt? Do you want a t-shirt? I have shirts now. Look in the description for a link to a t-shirt you can buy. If you don't buy the t-shirt, I'll kill your family. If you don't buy the t-shirt, I'll poison your dog. If you don't buy the t-shirt, you're going to be the only person in town that does not have a t-shirt. Everyone's going to look at you funny. There's going to be social consequences to not having one of these t-shirts. I am now making express threats of violence against you if you do not buy my t-shirt. I will call the police, tell them how you're not buying my shirt. They're going to plant crack in your house, and they're going to arrest you and then beat you up in a jail cell. Buy my shirt.